Hello, everyone. I am Lisa Anna Palmer, also known as the VP Coach, founder of Light Your Leadership Inc., author of the international best-selling book, Light a Fire in Their Hearts, The Truth About Leadership, and creator of the LYLTalks podcast. Today's show is about demystifying AI for leaders in law enforcement and public safety. Our guest is Dr. Joseph J. Lestrange, an AI Evangelist who is currently the Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at METIS Intelligence in North America. METIS is a leading provider of AI-driven intelligence solutions to law enforcement, public safety, and security agencies. He is also a postdoctoral fellow at the Future Policing Institute and has over 30 years of experience in law enforcement, public safety, and national security, including as the former Division Chief and Homeland Security Investigations, Public Safety and National Security Division, where he provided global executive oversight of multiple law enforcement interdiction, investigation, and intelligence units, agency programs, federal task forces, and interagency operations initiatives. During his career, he also worked at the Department of Justice and at the DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis. Known for his innovative problem solving, Dr. Lestrange has spent his career integrating innovative military, law enforcement, nonprofit, and private sector strategies to enhance global security, reduce crime, and find solutions to complex public safety and national security problems. Dr. Lestrange has authored a 25-point strategic plan to reimagine, reinvest, and rebuild public safety organizations in response to social and political unrest resulting from the wrongful death of George Floyd, the COVID pandemic, and the siege on the U.S. Capitol that was lauded as an innovative, holistic, and technology-focused prescription to complex public safety challenges. To develop the next generation of leaders, Dr. Lestrange teaches global leadership, business strategy, and change management to PhD and MBA students at Tiffin University and Indiana Tech. Wow, welcome, Dr. Lestrange. What an honor.
I think you're making me blush a little bit over here. Thank you for that great introduction.
So AI is a big topic. I
Yes, it
mean,
is.
everybody's thinking about it, wondering about it. What does it mean? And, I'm really glad you're here today to help us to demystify some of it and also bust some myths, as well as have advice for leaders on how they can implement, particularly in law enforcement and public safety. So let's dive in.
Okay.
Yeah, so Dr. Lestrange, if you could tell us more about your career and how did it lead you to become involved in AI in the first place?
Well, great. Well, thank you again. I did spend 30 years plus as a federal commissioned officer, starting out with the Justice Department. And then I transferred over to the U.S. Customs Service at the time as an officer and special agent. And of course, we all know in 2001, 9/11 happened. So we got merged into the new Department of Homeland Security. The agency that wound up evolving from that was Homeland Security Investigations. And that's where I spent the remaining of my federal career. So how I transitioned to AI is kind of a little bit of a long story, but I'll try and give you the Reader's Digest version. After 9/11, obviously, I was a first responder, and then I was pulled from the pile to start, helping with the investigation with the FBI on, how it happened, how we were so vulnerable, all that kind of stuff to figure out who did it and bring people to justice. And one of the big lessons that I took away from 9/11 really was, how missing important information that's buried in the government bureaucracy or even among other police agencies, can hurt our country and our communities. And, the culture in policing, unfortunately, is to keep things very close to the chest. We want to solve the case. We don't trust the federal agencies. We don't trust the state and locals. And so a lot of stuff happens in a vacuum. And a lot of stuff is siloed. And even as technology has grown over the years, that those silos still exist in the different information systems, and in the humans that are making the decisions on what to share, what to collaborate, with, and so on and so forth. So, I really spent, that event in my life and my career. I was about 10 years on the job when it happened. Really kind of triggered something inside of me to spend the rest of my career working on building bridges in the task force environment First working as an investigator, and then by the time I retired from federal service, I was responsible for our agency's task forces all across the country, and even some international task forces. And as I got towards the end of my career, probably the last 5, 6, 7 years, there was a big shift really in how we did our job, and technology was becoming more and more of a piece of it. And it really became about data, right? And how do we sift through the data and find what we need? Now, when I started years ago, right, as an investigator, we had very little technology comparatively to today, right? And so you would catch a lead on a case, right? And you would follow that lead until you exhausted it, and then you'd realize, okay, this is not going anywhere. Let's go back to the drawing board. And you would find another lead, and you would follow that. And most of the times when we were successful making a case, a lot of it had to do with luck and hard work, right? And now the young folks today coming onto the job as investigators and police officers, they have like quite the opposite problem. They have so much data and so many technologies bringing them so much data that it's almost impossible to find what they need to find in order to solve the problem, right? So that's where AI kind of comes in. And so, in the last couple of years of my federal career, I took on a collateral duty working up at the main DHS that supervises all of the DHS agencies at the department level, where I helped lead a work group across the entire security and law enforcement portfolio, which is about 9 agencies across DHS. And we were working on developing an infrastructure across DHS that would help us fuse intelligence data sources, provide a sort of data warehouse and collaborative space that we could share information, right? And then the objective was to build AI enhanced tools that would drive big data analytics. And the hope there was to derive insights that could help us coordinate joint operations across the department. And ironically, I lobbied the National Security Council and DHS, and we were able to get $200 million earmarked to do this project. And then the administration changed over. And every time the administration changes over, they put a moratorium on special projects, and then they usually take about a year, and then they kick things into gear again the following year. So what happened was during that year pause, all of the agencies that we worked on with the project all went back into their silos essentially. And by the time we kicked it back into gear, there was no joint department-wide collaborative strategy anymore, which was very disheartening to me. But this is typical of government. Government moves very slow, and especially when it comes to technology. So I wound up retiring shortly after that. And I was doing some consulting, and in fact, when I met you initially at the conference we were at together, I was working as a consultant with this company called METIS Intelligence. And they, about a year later, pitched me to run their operations here for North America. And that's kind of how I wound up in AI. What METIS Intelligence does is it fuses data between systems. It builds tools in order to help investigators solve their cases much faster than they would doing it manually. An area that we think we're at the tip of the spear called cross-domain intelligence, right? And we're trying to derive insights basically to help police do their job better and public safety agencies do their job better and stuff. And what I really liked about METIS is that we're doing the same thing that we were trying to do at DHS with a software-based platform that's affordable, can be leveraged by police agencies of all sizes and budgets, which is really important. And so here we are, and I'm really glad to be with you today.
Yeah, well, thank you for that overview, because it's always interesting to see how people move along the career journey. And I also understand that you're very passionate about mentoring the next generation of leaders, which is great. And it's so like I love the insight you brought. Back when you started, there wasn't enough information, or it was sparse. Like you had to kind of dig for it, right? Where
Absolutely.
now there's an avalanche of information. And it's really overwhelming. Like I could just imagine, where do you pick and choose? How do you focus? So that's where AI then comes in to help I guess, analyze that information and bring out the most important pieces or the most relevant, I imagine.
Yeah, essentially what we're doing in AI, and there's many different types of AI that are being applied to solve modern day problems. But really, the top thing is that we're automating mundane type of processes that human beings normally would do
Mm.
in order to do them faster and be able to go through tons and tons of information in seconds that would take humans months, maybe even years to go through to find answers to the questions we have, and then bring that to the surface for decision, right? And I think, that's really the crux of how AI is going to change the world and change how we do things. You hear stories, if you keep up on AI, about, solving a problem related to a piece of information you needed, to decode the genome, for a particular disease, right? That, AI can go through research journals from all over the world in a couple of minutes that would take, researchers maybe a decade to go through, and can find that one little piece of information that helps solve the puzzle, right? In order to stop curing a disease. You hear so many great stories about things that are happening in this space, and it's a very exciting time.
Mhm. Yeah, and it certainly adds new skill sets too, right? Whereas in the past, yeah, I imagine your investigative skills of where to go find things and information versus now it's probing. How do you ask the right questions?
Yeah, well, it's all about the questions, right? I mean, and again, there's a human element to AI, right? And so if you ask the right questions, and you train the AI models the right way, to look for that information, and they will find. There's a lot of myths out there about AI, right? I think we're at an inflection point now where we need some more education on the subject so that people can kind of understand exactly what's going on in this new revolution of technology, and can embrace it, instead of be afraid of it.
Right, right. So maybe tell us a little bit more about the myths. So what would you say are your top three myth busts about AI?
Sure, sure. No, this is a really good question. Well, first of all, it's not this magic, infallible creation, right? We're really at the start of the race here, and AI has been around for a really long time. It's been around at least 30 years. You've heard the word algorithm used before, right? So AI has been, in development for years. I think it's gotten a really lot of attention ever since, like, these open platforms hit the market about a year and a half ago, like ChatGPT and things like that. So all of a sudden now, you ask a computer a question, it's doing all this stuff for you, making recipes, writing papers, writing letters, and everybody is sort of reacting in a really excited way, but also in a panic. But AI systems in general are only as good as the data that they're trained on, right? And if the AI doesn't have enough data, or the data is incomplete, it sometimes hallucinates and just makes stuff up, right? And so the need for human supervision is very, very important. And there's a lot of really amazing things that it could do and perform, but a lot of work goes into designing the solutions, the coding, training the algorithms, configuring the software, making adjustments all the way through the process, and even after the end user is using it, based on feedback or based on how the end user uses it. Um, and AI can be biased as well, right? So if the AI is trained on data that's biased, then the AI is going to make conclusions based on that same bias, right? And that becomes, a significant thing to consider when you're using AI in law enforcement, right? So there really needs to be that human interaction, that human supervision. Um, and the second thing, and that leads me into the second myth, really, where you hear all the stuff all the time that AI is going to come along and replace everybody's jobs, right? And that's just simply not true. Now, just like any other technology that's introduced, the market needs to have time to adjust to the new technology, and there needs to be a period of retraining workers for the new jobs of the future, right? And you see this, I like to use the example when I go around talking about this. You see this happening over the last several years with clean energy, right? So for decades, right, we've had the technology for solar panels and wind powered turbines and all stuff like that, right? And But the technology was held back for fears of putting oil and gas out of business. We would lose all of these jobs. And then finally, the government got their act together and came in over the last 5 years or so with job training, to teach people new skills so that instead of, working at an oil refinery, maybe they're working on fixing or installing solar panels and wind turbines, right? And at the same time, while pursuing an all energy policy, so that you built in that buffer for the transition. So it allows everything to keep up, right? And the transition really has been remarkable over the last several years, right? So I see the need, if I was, sort of predicting into the future, I see the need to do the same thing with artificial intelligence, right? Will we lose some jobs and will some jobs become obsolete? Absolutely. That's just natural with the invention of any new technology. Of course, we hope to get rid of the mundane jobs, right? Because they're boring. But there'll be new jobs that are needed to, code, the engineers, to develop the solutions for AI, to create useful products, to review and audit as a human to make sure that the AI is doing that automated process it was taught to do accurately, right? And like I said earlier, AI really is automating things that humans do. So we'll still need those humans to make the decisions and interpret the answers that AI brings to them. And that kind of brings me to the third piece. You hear these people talking about how AI is like, human, or they're afraid it's going to be human. AI, even the most advanced models that are being used by the huge big companies lack emotions. They lack self-awareness. They have no empathy. They have no consciousness, right? So I think we have a tendency to overestimate AI because of what we see in the movies in Hollywood and
Right.
stuff on social media. But don't get me wrong, it does amazing things, right? But it's designed to provide humans with the ability to do their work faster, more efficiently, and more accurately, right? But since it lacks the human qualities, we can't leave these solutions to their own devices. So the products or the services that AI produces, have to always be interpreted, supervised, and audited by humans. And we have to be careful, really, not to confuse the word automation with autonomous, right? Because they're
Right.
two very different things.
Right.
So that's my sort of takeaway from the three, myth busts, for lack of a better expression, like you put it.
Right, right. Uh, Basically, AI, like you said, is not perfect. It's not human, and it still needs human intervention. It's not going to obliterate everybody's job. It's just going to create new jobs like other technology inventions did in the past. I mean, from the Industrial Revolution, right?
Yeah,
As soon as we started building machines, well, it changed the way people work, and it's how do we embrace it? Now, an interesting point, though, that you bring up because around the emotions, the humanity. So I've heard a number of times that, in fact, AI is being used to teach empathy, which kind of blew my mind. So since then, I've done a little research on it. I understand that it knows what words to say because you've trained it, but it doesn't feel it. So,
exactly.
right,
Exactly. And look, we have language learning models, right, where you build these like vast databases and dictionaries, essentially, right? And then you design a solution or the answer to a question around whether or not the AI sifts through the data and finds these words, right? And then it makes decisions based on the way you build these dictionaries and the way you build the questions that you pose to the system, right? So yes, you could teach an algorithm that anytime, in a conversation, a person makes the sound, "Ah, you poor thing," and says that it'll flag that conversation and it'll bring that information, right,
so
uh,
interesting.
to a
So,
dashboard. But the AI doesn't feel it. Now, the belief from the scientists, that work in this space all the time is that eventually the decision making that you build over a long, long library and a long, long study of language and linguistics, they'll eventually help the computer make those decisions more accurately as time goes on, but the computer's never going to actually feel it. I
Right.
think that's the science fiction stuff, right? So again, it goes down to what data are you using in order to train the system. You could actually train an AI system, right? That every time somebody goes, oh, poor baby, you could train that system to interpret that as a bad thing, not empathy, right? It depends on how the engineers and the developers and the coders train the AI to respond to those words. So
Mm.
if you redefine the word empathy to be something different and you train your models that way, then you can actually, have the AI make a decision that an aggressive statement is empathy, right?
Wow, that's
See what I'm
so
saying?
interesting. Yeah, and does that have to do like sort of you mentioned earlier the hallucinations? How does it hallucinate?
So hallucinations really happen more from when you have incomplete information or the question's not defined in a way that the AI understands it. I mean, I could give you a perfect example, right? So you can go and try and write a research paper online and it'll do a great job and it'll pull, so you could even give it specific instructions, use APA 7 formatting, and it'll give you your bibliography, and it'll do all this stuff and write this great paper for you, and then you go and you start pulling up the sources it mentions at the end of your bibliography, and a third of them don't exist. It just makes stuff up because it's using this sort of uh, structure inside to continue making the argument you asked it to make. And so when it's lacking the data, or the data is kind of sparse, or it misinterprets the question, just sometimes will put stuff in there.
It
Another example.
improvises. It sounds like it improvises.
Yeah, yeah, it improvises. Another example I remember from I forgot the woman's name, but she's one of the you know forefront folks in the AI business, and I saw a TED talk, and she gives this example where you ask the AI to help figure out a way to walk over the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge without stepping on the glass that's under the bridge. Think about that for a second. So the glass is under the bridge. It's not on the top of the bridge. So if you walk across the bridge, you're not going to step on the glass. But the AI goes through this entire, sort of the chat GPT, I guess they tested this on, goes through this entire, way of like, oh, you climb up on the side rails and, you walk across, or you wear these big, thick boots, or you drive in a car instead of walking. Like it gives you all these solutions. But meanwhile, the problem definition was that the glass was under the bridge and it was not going to be a problem, right? Because you're walking over the bridge. So these are the kind of things that AI makes mistakes on. And again, why, I always revert back to that, any solution derived from AI should be supervised by humans.
Mm. You know what? This conversation is driving home how important competencies are going to continue to be. Values and ethics,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Things like discernment, judgment,
Yeah.
those are actually going to increase because it's one thing to do research and you find something in a book and it's the author who wrote it and it's well annotated and everything. You don't have to question that when it's a verified resource. But then all of a sudden you're using AI as a tool, then you have to know where to dig and how to dig to make sure to verify the information that you're reading so that you're not just propagating these hallucinations. So that's actually really interesting in terms, if you think about it from a leadership perspective, and also the kind of people that you want to assign to these kinds of roles, you really have to think things through. You can't just put anyone in charge of running these queries or looking for this information. So,
Yeah, and you have to also keep in mind too, especially like things like Chat GPT, right? These open AI platforms, like they're searching the internet for data. But as you know, as well as I do, the internet is full of misinformation and disinformation, right? So you do have to check your sourcing. And you know, because of that human element, AI doesn't necessarily know how to fact check or, you know, figure out what's real and what's not sometimes. Although it is getting better, but the chance of misinformation and disinformation, sort of bleeding into the fabric of the answer that it brings back to you is a concern, and it's something we need to be aware of it. And if you're, for example, the example I gave earlier, if you're asking it to do an outline for you of a paper or, for a speech or for a PowerPoint presentation, you really do have to go in and check the sources, to make sure that they exist, number one, and make sure, number two, that, review them and make sure that what the AI is concluding it says is actually what it says, right? Otherwise, you're putting yourself at risk.
Hmm. And this underscores the importance of the human element as well, right?
100%.
So let's not panic too much. We're still needed as human beings,
Yeah,
and it's actually we need to up our skills and competencies in certain areas to be able to really use these tools properly and do it with ethics and values and for the greater good, really. So
absolutely. And, that brings me to, another point, like where I get into these conversations all the time, where people, kind of come from the perspective of doom and gloom,
yes.
machines are going to take over the world and so on and so forth, right? And you have to be very, sort of political in those conversations sometimes, because AI brings really two concerns, major concerns from both sides of the polity, right? So the people on the left are really concerned about the bias or the potential bias, right? That if you train the data on biased information, you can have a biased outcome, and especially in policing, right? That is a big concern. And then on the other hand, the folks on the right, or the more conservative side, are really worried about the invasion of privacy, right? And how this technology is going to sort of, make everything that's private to then public, and so on and so forth. So, um, you know, and this is normal, right? And I think this is the people, the leadership, has to embrace the fact that, you know, uh, this has been what happens in every big breakthrough in technology since the beginning of time. And I remember, I'm sure you remember too, we're dating ourselves, but I remember rushing home on New Year's Eve in 1999 because we thought everything was going to shut down. The whole world
Yes.
was going to
Oh my
stop,
God.
right?
It was on a
When,
project for that.
right? Yeah. Because, the computers didn't know how to interpret the one turning to a two for the first
The
time,
end of the
right?
world.
And
Yes.
right, and we all rushed home from dinner, and nothing happened, right? And then what happens? The internet comes out, and then people reacted, sort of panic to that, and then the Internet of Things came out, right? With all your devices and things in your house that are controlled by Wi-Fi and the internet, and that was going to bring us doom and gloom too. And look, AI is just the next big breakthrough, right? And if you look at the positive side, right, the internet helped connect the world, allowed anyone with a computer, an internet connection to conduct business globally, right? Stuff like that. And then on the negative, though, because of the internet, now we have things we have to worry about like cyber intrusions and ransomware attacks and so on and so forth, right? So there's always a positive and negative. And, AI is the next big technology revolution. Let's face it. And it's here at our doorstep. And people don't understand it. They're afraid of it, right? So this is normal. So, like anything else, each time we have a new thing, right, a new technology, there'll be some people who will use it for good, and then there'll be some other people that use it for bad. And so, I think, do I think we're going to make the Matrix or Skynet? No, I really don't, right? But if we don't establish common sense guardrails and use AI responsibly, can we wind up with some bad stuff as a result? Of course we will. And no matter how much we try and how good we are at setting up these guardrails and using it responsibly, there will still be some people that will use it for bad things. Um, and that's just the same thing that happens with any technology. Now, if you will indulge me a few seconds longer on this subject, one concern that I do have, though, is that most of the cutting edge research and development in AI, right, like the big stuff, is being done by a few big, huge companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and IBM, right? And so there is a perspective from a governance standpoint and from a social cohesiveness standpoint that, anytime a few people hold so much money and power with information and technology, that potentially could be a problem, right? And what we're trying to do, at our company, METIS, is we're trying to democratize AI essentially by making the products we build affordable for any size police agency, right? Because in the past, the only people that could really afford AI in the police departments are the huge police departments like, NYPD, LAPD, maybe Chicago PD or Miami PD, like those big agencies, and, maybe, of course, the federal agencies. But the people that work in the small agencies, whether it's a 10-person department or a 50-person department or a 100-person department, they need these tools as well. And sometimes even more so than the big agencies, because the big agencies can just, throw money at the problem, from other parts of their big budgets, or they could just throw more people at the solution, at the problem to make a solution, excuse me. And so I do think that, as this evolves, I think the government is going to need to do a little bit more than they're doing right now to earmark grant money for research and development of building AI solutions, sort of like an incubator to startups like the one I work for. And as it stands right now, the way we get our funding is private funding, right? We get an idea, we get a few venture capitalists to back us up and invest money, startup money, and then we have like a, Series A funding round and a Series B funding round in the hopes that always over time, we'll be acquired by somebody or we'll go IPO, right? And that's how, the model is sort of built right now. It's all relying on private capital and funding. But really, I think, this is a moment where we are just like how the government got involved behind the scenes with the development of the internet. That, if we really want to rev the engines of creativity and innovation and competition, we need to figure out other ways of funding these small companies and startups like mine, not just through VCs. So that's one concern that I do think about, to make sure that the playing field is equal and that the AI tools that are developed that are helping and doing good for society get into the hands of everybody that needs them. And, as my CEO, Nathan Bandler, says, we need to take steps to democratize the use of AI, not just through open platforms, but through private platforms so that we can bring solutions to everybody.
Mm. That's an important message on so many levels and all kinds of technology, right? And I think
Yeah,
what you said earlier, right? It's almost like the funding needs to catch up um, with the need. And
yeah,
and also, as you said earlier, when technology is invented, when there's massive innovations, it can be either used for good or for bad. So we need to really pay attention to that. You know, Likely if there's opportunities to do it or use it for nefarious reasons, it's going to happen. So we need to have good people involved with good values, good judgment to be able to, as you say, democratize it and put it in the hands of everyone so that we don't become subject to those with massive amounts of money that we don't have, right? So I think that's an important concept in society in general is that whatever um, can be purchased needs to be also made available to everyone so that it becomes more fair and equitable and used in a balanced way. Because
right.
you don't want the balance to shift more towards, what can be done just, based on greed and based on power versus what can be done for the good of humanity, as you mentioned.
Right. And you will have niches, right? Like I'm sure, the kid in college is not going to care about, or maybe they care about it, but they're not going to want to buy a solution. They should be able to buy a solution that law enforcement uses to catch criminals, right? Or to catch, somebody that robbed the bank or something, right? But, when we start getting into governance, we also start having these conversations about, setting up guardrails and using, AI responsibly. We have to start having these conversations too, about what does that look like, right? Because I think to your point, the capital and the investment hasn't caught up to the technology. But what often happens in government and in policing agencies is that the internal governance and the rules for using technology very rarely keep up with the technology as well. So, most policies in most police agencies and law enforcement public safety agencies are outdated for what we're looking at and doing now. And then a police agency gets faced with a situation where, wow, this tool can really help us, lower crime, and yet they have no structure internally in order to establish guardrails to make sure that their officers use it responsibly, right? And this is something that at METIS we work with agencies that become potential clients with us to help uh, sort of frame that discussion from the get-go, right? And one of the things that I would advise leaders of police agencies, law enforcement agencies, public safety agencies, or any government agencies really, when they're bringing a potential AI solution to their organization, the first thing, and I think you touched upon it earlier, is that we have to make sure we educate ourselves, right? Now, at METIS, we do this thing called METIS Academy, where we will show up and we'll educate a group of multi-agency, stakeholders on uh, the technology itself. We have a 12-step program, to sort of guide them through the process of bringing an AI technology into their organizations. And we go through a lot of the, things that are real about it and what it can actually do. And the other things that are red flags, that if a vendor is trying to sell them something a certain way, that they should be suspicious. And because we feel that educating our potential clients is going to set the foundation for our best customers, right? But there are also a lot of schools and colleges giving certificate programs in AI and ML for leadership. And they're not really getting into the fine-tuning engineering and coding part of it, but they're helping, to create a basis of knowledge, essentially, that leadership can understand when somebody brings to them a potential solution and wants to spend money, right, on bringing that into the organization. They understand what they're talking about a little bit, and the vendor is not able to sell them snake oil, right? And I think, leaders also have to start thinking about AI as something that's here, it's here to stay, and it's going to become more and more of the Wild West until the United States as a whole and state and local governments start building these infrastructures and governance plans for it. So, you have to think about things like, how is AI going to affect my strategic planning, right? You have to think about how is it going to affect my budget, right? Technology can be costly, right? Even simple things like, oh, we have this great new system now, and we need to expand how much space we have for storage on the cloud, right? Do we have an implementation plan, throughout our agency? Do we have, considerations in our implementation plan and our strategic planning about how it's going to affect our training, right? Because AI tools will need to be trained to the officers. And how much time are we going to spend on it? Is it something they'll learn in the academy and then they're off to their own devices, right? Or are we going to have in-service training? Are we going to be able to, at some point, shift the training from the vendor to in-house training? These are all decisions that leadership needs to think about when bringing AI into their organization. And probably the most important thing, in my opinion, is creating buy-in with a diverse set of stakeholders inside and outside the organization as early as possible to get them sitting at the table early as potential decision makers and give them input and put together work groups with stakeholders from different parts of the organization, not just the people that are going to be using it, but like your legal counsel, your privacy folks, your acquisitions folks, of course, the IT department, right? Um, in public safety agencies, I always advise the police chiefs that I deal with, like, get the community involved too, because at the end of the day, the police are going to be using, the technology in the public to help solve crimes, which affects the community. It's going to have an impact on the community, right? So, um, getting that buy-in ahead of time and participation by community members that are trusted and people throughout your organization that are trusted, it's going to build trust. It's going to build confidence in the strategy and what you're using the AI for. And the more transparency you have across all of these stakeholders, the more support you're going to have. Because just like any technology, at some point, something might go wrong, right? You might use facial identification and it identifies the wrong person. But if everybody understands all of the check boxes that you went through in order to make sure that you had a process in place to minimize those mistakes, and you always had a human overseeing it, right? Then it's going to mitigate the damage that that negative
Hmm.
event has, right, on the police agency and the community itself, right? So those are things that I think leadership can think about, when bringing AI into their organizations. And I think it's very important to have that sort of holistic perspective and not operate, like we call it squirrel, like, oh wow, shiny object, let's go buy it, let's use it. Oh great, it'll help make the arrest faster. But we thinking through these things, because if we don't, then we wind up creating more fears. And you can just do a Google search when we get off of this webcast, right? That you'll find 100 articles about all these terrible things that AI is doing, and I would bet my salary that most of the time it's human error in how it's interpreting the AI or cutting corners or so on and so forth.
Right. Lack of judgment and
Yeah,
discernment, right? Or using the analysis. Like we need to be analytical thinkers when we're using AI to know, how to question it, to question the results we get, to really apply that discretion and judgment that
yeah,
humans have. So, I mean, to me, that's really good news because we need to build processes and systems, ways of working where that happens so
right,
that somebody just doesn't get a result from AI and act on it automatically,
right,
right? And I think that's where your training is super important and is certainly part of a change and transition management strategy that needs to take place when leaders are implementing these big changes into the
yeah.
way that we use certain tools, into the way we work, into the way we relate to one another, to the clients, to the community, etc. So I think those are really important. And all those things have to do with leadership and to have
Right,
leadership to recognize that you're implementing AI with humans and
right.
that your organization is made up of humans. So what is the human need to make sure that the transition goes smoothly and to ensure that people have everything they need to use the tool to the best of their abilities and in a way that's sound and helpful for the community?
And responsible. And really, what it comes down to is you should be working with the technology. The technology should not be a replacement for what the human does.
Yeah,
It should be a complementary tool or a skill that the AI can do to make you have more information at your fingertips at the end to make a better decision because you're more informed because of the ability for the AI to do things that humans just can't do, right?
right,
But at the end of the day, to your point, we really want to have the decision makers cognizant of the fact that AI is not to cut corners. AI is to do more with less, right?
right, right,
One of the things that I face working in the industry of providing solutions for policing is that, as we know, over the last several years, the attrition rate in policing has gone down and tremendously. And, a lot of retirements, a lot of people that were shooken up by the post-George Floyd era, a lot of the younger folks and the Gen Z folks really don't have an interest in policing, and the numbers are down across the country, with some exceptions, but for the most part, they're down. And the police chiefs have been crying like, we need more people. We need, new recruitment and retention strategies. And the bodies just are not coming. So what can we do with technology to bring that work level up the same as if you had those people? And does it make sense for a police chief to say, you know what, I've been down, let's say they have 100 sworn officers in their force, and they've been down 20 positions for 3 years and haven't been able to get above that. Does it make sense to that chief to say, let me take half of that or a third of that, convert that funding into funding that could be used for technology, and let me go out and find some solutions that have AI driving, the ship behind the scenes a little bit in order to reduce that gap of service to the public, right? I mean, these are decisions that need to be made. And some of the, forward thinking police leaders are already embracing these things and saying, all right, um, I'm not going to replace jobs, but the jobs that I can't seem to replace, it's certainly not going against the grain in order to take one position. Let's just say an officer makes on the average throughout the country $150,000 a year, right? If I take two of those 20 positions that I'm down and I can buy a solution for $300,000 that will help me do the work of or help my existing detectives do the work of six detectives, I'm going to have higher case clearance rates in my city, right? That means if I have higher case clearing rates, that means that people are being brought to justice for the crimes they're committing. That means my crime should be coming down, right? I'm able to do more complex investigations, let's say, so I'm able to have a positive impact even though my numbers are down. These are things that police leaders need to start thinking about, and really yesterday they need to start thinking about, right? Not 5 years from now. So, and these are all things that we're trying to solve out there, and there's many companies out there with all kinds of different products and solutions, and including ours, and this is where we're heading.
Yeah. And what's good about this time is that we do have lessons learned to draw from the earlier waves of technology, like the enterprise-wide systems and et cetera. There were a lot of lessons learned out of that, especially by organizations that just flicked the switch and hoped everything went well. There's a lot of preparation that needs to go into that, and you need to work with professionals who know what they're doing to be
Yeah,
able to help you set things up for success and for the technology to be used properly, responsibly, as you said, and based in a way that really is able to help the existing people in the organizations and also to fill those gaps.
yeah,
And when you speed things along, everybody benefits, even the person who might get arrested, right? Instead of
sure.
for a court date for 3 years or whatever it is, the case will be processed faster. So even at that level, in
Yeah,
a sense, it's more humane. So I think it's really interesting times we're in, as you said, and that leaders need to be conscious that this is happening. So whether or not they decide to go with AI in their organizations is happening everywhere around them. So
right.
you either, you beat them or join them, and
Yeah,
but join them in a way that makes sense and with the proper expertise, because that was another lesson learned, I think, from previous waves of technology is when you try to do it yourself, and it's very hard and difficult, and why do it that way when you can work with professionals such as yourself to be able to navigate some very difficult decisions and processes and ways of implementing it properly. So
yeah.
maybe,
If you don't mind me jumping in, because you said something that triggered a quick thought before we move on. Another thing that I'm starting to see that leaders have to be cognizant of too is that as AI was developing in the law enforcement public safety space, you know, people were just doing anything they could do to get a customer, right? And so it was a very open sort of collaborative effort between, the competition. And what I'm starting to see now, which is concerning, because we built our company to be what we call vendor agnostic, so we can use data and do analytics from any type of company. But there are other companies out there that are working very proprietary, where you have to give your data to them in order to do the analytics, and then they control how and when you get that data back, which is your data, and who you can share it with, right? So that's something that I think leaders have to be very cognizant of too. That working with open platforms like ours allow you to basically keep and retain all of your data and apply the analytics in house, whether that's up in the cloud or in a non-server, on-prem system. But you have to be very careful when you're negotiating a contract that there's nothing in the contract that basically makes you beholden to the vendor. That if you give them your data and you want to use that data in order to apply another tool that you want to buy somewhere else, that company doesn't offer, or even they do offer but it doesn't work as well, right? That you can't get that data back, right? Because then that becomes a prohibitive technology that you're bringing into your organization, right? So Whether you come to METIS for your solution or go to another company, one of the things that you should be really making sure you drill down on is, all right, number one, do I have to allow you to take my data, which is full of privacy information, right? And of course, there are all types of certifications and everything in order to do that. But what happens when I give you my data? Can I, get it back? Like, can I develop an API with another company that'll allow, the systems to communicate with each other, right? In my opinion, if I was a police chief now, I would only be buying technologies that were vendor agnostic so that I can build what works for me and my agency, right? And that's, I think, something that you don't want to, we all, there's a big company out there, I won't, mention the name of it to be a gentleman and be polite, but there's a big, huge company that kind of started the ball rolling in this area. And, once they have your data, they have it. That's it. And you have to, use them all the time. And you have to go to them to develop solutions for you, even though you might be able to buy another one off the shelf, right? And a lot of the huge companies are like that. So you have to be very aware, and that's why I was saying earlier we're trying to not only be vendor agnostic, but be sort of that boutique shop that can piece together different technologies and different solutions from different vendors in your organization and use a software to connect it and then apply the analytical layer using AI for it, right? And so, I would encourage, police and law enforcement leaders to think about that as they're making decisions or not whether to bring a product into their organizations, because it's very important, for that strategy piece we were talking about, and that budgeting piece. It's important not to have any surprises. If you have a plan and you've budgeted this amount and you want to integrate, these 5 systems or 10 systems over the next 10 years, you don't want to get, into that 5-year part of the plan and all of a sudden realize that everything you did up to that point is obsolete now because all of your data is controlled by your vendors, right? So
Wow.
you have to think of this stuff.
That's a really, really important point
Yeah,
because somebody might not figure that out until they they want their data and
exactly.
they need to move and there's the fine print. It's like, well, especially in enforcement or I
Yeah,
imagine even in
exactly.
healthcare services,
Yep.
that is, I would say that's probably one of the most important questions to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that and
Thank
raising
you.
awareness. So can you share some AI success stories that you've had?
Sure. Well, look, listen, there's some amazing work going on in policing and law enforcement with AI, and you can read about it all over, the internet. I mean, AI is helping to, identify areas where there's more crime, right? So that police can use place-based strategies in order to deploy additional resources into these areas, to help bring crime down. We've made advancements in robotics and drones that are guided by AI systems, right? So, and a lot of cities are starting to deploy drones as first responders to have an overwatch before the police even show up to know what's going on. Maybe there's a shooting, and the AI is able to, just sort of send those pictures down, to the police officers in their command in their vehicles to see what's going on before they get there, so they can more safely approach the suspect or so on and so forth. We're deploying technology that can track license plates and cell phones, across all over the city that you work or whatever, or even the country, in order to be able to place a person that committed a crime at the scene at that time when it happened. We're using digital forensics to decipher, associations and conspiracies and location-based crimes just by downloading information from a phone, right, using another device. And we're even doing things like helping police write police reports quicker, or feeding information into a police report so that the police officer can spend less time doing these sort of mundane tasks and spend more time actually in the community doing community policing, right? And then even using facial and object recognition to identify and apprehend suspects, based on identifications and stuff at the crime from like a CCTV video or from a traffic camera catching somebody, fleeing the scene of the crime or so on and so forth. So there's just so many things that we could do a whole nother session on just the different things that AI is contributing to for success for police work. As far as what we're doing at METIS that I'm really proud about is two things. First, I think we're really at the tip of the spear with what I mentioned earlier, what we call cross-domain analytics, right? So there are a lot of companies out there that are working in specific sort of silos within AI. I've broken those silos into five areas, essentially: your metadata, your video and audio, your locational data, your digital forensics, and your communication systems, right? And then you have also some inputs like record management systems as well. And we're able to work across all of those domains at the same time and really help take your data and based on questions that you ask the system, like a human would ask the question, we call it cognitive automation. We're able to basically replicate the investigative process using AI to search through all of these systems simultaneously and aggregate the information for any system into a particular answer of a question for you so you can help solve your crimes really quick. So I'm really proud of what we're doing there. And we call it, providing or shortening the time to actionable intelligence. So your operators are able to actually go out and do something because they are able to make these conclusions faster and get people that have committed crimes off the street faster. But probably the most important thing we've done recently is we've been really working with the most advanced levels of what we don't even call facial and object recognition anymore. We call them similarity detection models, where we're able to detect similarity between faces, objects, and backgrounds. And we just recently finished a pilot where we were working with a developmental partner, a police agency, and we were able to speed up the review of like terabytes and terabytes of media files for child exploitation investigations, where we're not only reducing the time that it takes between when an investigator seizes devices and seizes the computer and then goes out and arrests the person, but also we're reducing the amount of exposure to the materials that the investigators have to look at it because of some of the things we've been doing in that space. And at the end of the day, because of the work we're doing, it's going to provide an avenue to strengthen prosecutions against these predators against our children, which I think is nothing more important than protecting our children. So, those are the two areas that, we're thriving in as a company at METIS Intelligence, and I'm really proud of.
Yeah, those are powerful examples. And yeah, especially, if we can save children using what else is more important, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Are most vulnerable. And yeah, now uh how can you put the minds at ease of people who worry about privacy?
So again, it all comes down to governance, right? So just like any other technology, there are rules that most agencies follow in order to protect privacy. Um, for example, when I used to run the gang task force up in New York City, we did a lot of old-fashioned wiretaps, listening to people's cell phones. And there was a whole process we had to go through. It's not like in the movies where you just say, hey, I want to start listening to Lisa's calls. And then all of a sudden I'm listening to your phone. There's court procedure, there's agency procedure, there's Department of Justice review and procedures to that. Then you have to go in front of a judge, right? And yeah, the prosecutor that's sponsoring the wiretap has to get involved. So you have about 4 or 5 parallel structures of governance that are steps you have to clear in order to get the justification to use the technology to eavesdrop on a phone, right? And so what I see happening here is that if the agencies, like we were talking about, start to catch up and start building things internally to do the same thing with AI, right? Because there are different rules throughout the country. What I've learned, working across the country at the municipal level, there are some folks that are ahead of this. There are some folks that don't even know what AI is. There are some people in the middle. But when you're not sure or you don't have a specific policy for AI, what I always recommend is, all right, well, let's talk about the things you're concerned about. You're concerned about privacy. What other technologies do you use that you have governance for? Oh, wait, Joe, we have governance for eavesdropping on telephones. Okay, let's take a look at that policy and see where there are parallels between the privacy concerns that you're using AI to do. And you'll find, I think, a lot of times that you can piggyback off of an old technology and an old policy technology, excuse me, that to start building a policy that addresses the same concerns for the older technology with the newer technology, right? This is not rocket science, right? If we're being transparent about what we do, if we're training our folks on how to use it, if we're establishing rules on when it's appropriate to use it and when it's not appropriate to use it. And then the fourth and probably most important thing is what happens when somebody violates those processes that we've developed? What are the measures that we're taking as an agency to hold them accountable and to have some type of a either make it into a teaching moment or in some rare cases when it's really terrible, having a disciplinary element to it. And if you have those four things in place, you should be able to handle privacy issues because the AI isn't doing anything on its own. The AI is looking at the same data that you would look at as a human manually. The only thing we're doing with AI is automating that process. So you might also find in your organizations that you already have a process in place. You just have to adjust it a little bit in order to accommodate for the fact that you're automating what you're allowed to do in the first place, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, it makes total sense. Thank you for clarifying that because I'm sure it's a question people have. So it's basically be proactive so that you can get ahead of the curve and think through these policies and these rules that need to happen and take place and be disseminated so that it's being used properly according to the intent of the law.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you so much. So, Dr. Lestrange, how can people reach you?
So probably the easiest way to reach me is on LinkedIn. My profile on LinkedIn is Joseph J. Lestrange, PhD. Also, you can come visit our site at www.metis-intelligence.com. And when I say dash, not the underscore, the dash right in the middle. And then my email is joseph.lestrange@metis-intelligence.com.
Yeah, and METIS is spelled METIS.
Correct.
Excellent. Great. Any parting thoughts?
That's a really good question. I think at the end of the day, right, what I'd like to leave the audience with, and again, I appreciate the time that we spent together. I think we talked about a lot of really important things. And I think, look, at the end of the day, for at least people in the profession I came from and spent 30 years of my life, I will say that, in my opinion, early adopters are going to rule the day at the end of the day here, right? And what I mean by that is that we're on the cusp of a generational and technological avalanche is bigger, even bigger than the invention of the internet at this point with AI. And so, just like when any other technology hits the street, the early adopters are going to be the ones that actually have a say and will have a seat at the table to help determine how products are designed, what products are designed, the governance on how they're used, and will also have a seat at the table to create the infrastructure that these products and solutions will run on, right? So, my advice is that the future is here. We should embrace it, even though we move cautiously through it. And we should capitalize really on the value that AI can bring us at this great time to do great things to help solve great problems and complex problems that maybe we never even dreamed of before.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lestrange. It's really been an honor to get all this information about AI, how it's used in different ways, especially in security and law enforcement. And you busted some myths. You
I
helped
hope
us
so. I hope
helped us
so.
feel a bit calmer today by reminding us that we still need human beings to do this
Yes.
work. And really, I want to thank you on behalf of the audience and. We'll keep an eye on how METIS Intelligence is going and looking forward to the future.
Appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for your time today and for considering us and me to be on your podcast here. I think it was a great discussion.
Thank you.